welcome to another video on the Constructor Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, I'm the host of Constructor Criticism, and today we're talking about hashtag Quest for 10. Hashtag Quest for 10 is my goal over the next year, and maybe even further, to try and get 10 wins with every major deck in Standard. The major reason for this is I want to be able to really speak on the podcast about every deck that we talk about and really help the listeners. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well film it. I might as well talk about it, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be something I enjoy. So I'm actually behind. I need to do Esper as well. But today I actually just wanted to talk about my favorite deck. It's something that listeners are asking about. Shout out to Adrian. He very much wanted a video on this, and Adrian's one of my favorite listeners, so I wanted to make sure to give this to him. But today I'm going to talk about Gruul Aggro, or Gruul Midrange, or Gruul Warriors, or Gruul, or Mono Red Splash Green. Not really Mono Red. There's a lot of green cards in here. But I want to talk about this deck that I've been playing. It got me to Mythic last season. I'm Diamond right now with it, and this is the deck that I've been playing the most. So first of all, thank you to everybody over at patreon.com/ccmtg. If you're a patron over at patreon.com/ccmtg or patreon.com/thetrophymages, my two biggest pieces of content between my stream and my podcast, you have access to a Google Doc that shows you the lists as they're updated, the games, the records, the deck lists, everything is there for all of the patrons over there. So check that out and let's get better together. So let's talk about how this deck qualified. So first of all, this deck did not qualify through normal means. So typically, one of the things that you have to do to qualify for this is you have to get multiple top 8s. You have to get stuff like that. The deck is only 3.74% of the MTGO metagame, and it does not have a top 8. But what it does have is a ton of people playing this deck to try and get into the top 8 of the Mythic Invitational is where this deck really, really started to catch on steam. Tim Wu wrote an article on it, and we talked about it on the podcast last week, and we'll actually be talking about it on the podcast again this week. So if you want kind of a opinions of Seth Manfield and John Stern, go listen to this week's podcast that will come out here in the next couple days. We're going to do a deep dive on Gruul Aggro, but today's deep dive is on my list specifically and on kind of how things happen. So let's go over the final deck list. You see it on the screen here. We have 2 Shocks, 10 Mountain, 2 Dire Feet Daredevil, 3 Lava Coil, 3 Growth Chamber Guardian, 2 Gruul Guildgate, 2 Kraul Harpooner, 4 Goblin Chainwhirler, 4 Gruul Spellbreaker, 4 Rekindling Phoenix, 2 Colossus, 2 Skarrgan Hellkite, 4 Rootbound Crag, 4 Stomping Ground, 4 Unclaimed Territory, 2 Domri Chaosbringer, 2 Thrash Threat, and 4 Pelt Collector. In our sideboard, we have 2 Shivan Fire, 1 Lava Coil, 2 Legion Warboss, 2 Kraul Harpooner, 1 Status Statue, 4 Cindervines, 2 Karn, and 1 Fight with Fire. So we're playing 24 lands, and the biggest thing that I want to talk about with this list specifically is probably the most important land in the deck. If we look at Tim Wu's list, the first thing that we see is that he's playing forests. And one of the things that we immediately changed from Wu's list after just a couple of games between myself, Matt Kling, and Mason Clark was cutting the forests Unclaimed Territories. Because Unclaimed Territory, in this deck specifically, can name Warrior, and it names Kraul Harpooner. It names Gruul Spellbreaker. It names Growth Chamber Guardian. It names basically all of your inexpensive creatures other than Dire Fleet Daredevil, and most importantly, it names Goblin Chainwhirler, because Goblin Chainwhirler is a warrior. And because of that, I thought, well, okay, if I'm gonna play all this really aggressive deck, I kind of trimmed in a few places, and I tried out Pelt Collector. And I got to do that because of having it being a warrior itself and having Unclaimed Territory in the deck, and it just made my deck a little bit faster. So I think that's probably the most important land. The deck list that I'm showing here wins by being an aggressive deck, but it also wins through helping different parts of the curve, helping resolve the rest of your curve. So Gruul Spellbreaker makes it easier to resolve your next spell because they have to deal with during their turn, which means that things like Domri and things like things like Phoenix are easier to resolve, and once your Phoenix resolves, it's easier to resolve your next spell. And they kind of chain together and really punish your opponent's mana and resources in a way that other aggro decks don't. And that's one of the things I really have liked about this deck. So I think that for me, this deck wins, through those it's an aggressive deck, but in so many of the matchups in this format, it plays like a mid-range deck because you're the bigger aggro deck, so you get to play the control role, and that's my favorite type of aggro deck to play. So I really connected with this deck from the get-go. It was something I really enjoyed. So much so that I've been grinding it into oblivion. It's been really fun to play with this one. So, I think one of the key cards that I want to talk about here is Thrash Threat. So this card has been a recent addition to the deck. There are times where it's been really, really good, and times where it's been okay. It's replacing Lightning Strike, and Lightning Strike has been really, really bad for me. So I'm actually okay with this change. The other thing is that just like Lightning Strike, a really common use for this card is to use it to kill bigger things with your Goblin Chainwhirler. But that's how you lose Lightning Strike too. The only downside is when you fall behind. Obviously, Thrash Threat is a little different. But the thing is, the 4/4 is so big in the matchups where you're falling behind that it's almost better than the Lightning Strike. So that's been a really interesting change. Another key card that I think is really important is kind of understanding how you play your Growth Chamber Guardian. So the initial list had 4 Growth Chamber Guardians. And it became abundantly clear to me pretty fast that I did not need 4 of this card, because in any game where I'm activating twice, I'm either winning or I'm activating to desperately try and get card advantage not to lose, and the 4th one is not going to save me anyway because it's just a 5 mana 4/4. And so for that reason, I found, okay, like I can get a little bit of advantage from this card. I really like the card in the deck, but I definitely don't need the 4th one. Unlike Squadron Hawk, where I get all of them at once, I can only get one at a time of these, and it takes a lot of mana, and it's a huge mana investment. So that's kind of something to think about when you're playing this deck. And if you're trying different lists, is how many Growth Chamber Guardians do I really need? Not to say there weren't a few games where I was like, oh man, it's kind of sucks that I don't have the 4th, but it's far less than you would think. And drawing the second one really, really sucks. Because it's just a 2-mana 2/2, and then you already have the other one in play, so it just doesn't matter. So that's been a nice change. I think key card number 2, and one of my favorite additions to the deck, was Domri, Chaosbringer. This card's been insane. This has actually just been one of the best cards in the deck. It gives great card advantage. It's a really aggressive card in multiple matchups. It makes your stuff really hard to beat in the mirror, for example. If I get to play a 4/4 Chainwhirler against your 3/3 Chainwhirler, my Chainwhirler beats your Chainwhirler, and it's just been a huge boon to both the aggression in the deck, getting bigger, card advantage. It does everything this deck needs, and it was easier to cast than something like Vivian Reed. So originally, we had Vivian Reed on the sideboard, and then we switched them because this was so much easier to cast, and it was so good for me in post-board games. I actually changed the deck so that I could include it in the main deck and open up more slots to help my Esper matchup as I changed the deck up. And it has been super helpful. I don't think I've lost to Esper in a couple of days. So it's been a huge help, a huge boon, and something I've been really, really happy with. So I think that if I were to talk about a third card in the main deck that's really important and something that people should think about, it is definitely understanding how to play both your Skarrgan Hellkite and your Gruul Spellbreaker. Understanding when you want the 4/4, when you want the 5/5, when you want the mana sink versus when you just want the damage is really important, because the games where you lose by 3 damage or 4 damage, you have to think, okay, so for example, if you put the 1/1 counter on, it's like, did I make a mistake here? Did I get that 3 damage over 3 turns, or did this die in 1 turn or 2 turns and I missed out on that damage? And you have to understand what's going to give you the most damage output, because this is an aggressive deck. Now, in the games where you're playing a control game, I'm pretty often making my Spellbreaker a 4/4, something that's hard to deal with, something that's going to gum up the ground and make things easier for me to attack with it later, things like that. And the same thing is true of the dragon. I pretty often am just hasting out the dragon and things like that. The best is when you don't have to, though, and you can start activating. I lost a game, I think it might have even been on stream, where my opponent just got to activate twice with their Skarrgan Hellkite to just wipe my board, attack me, kill me. It was crazy. So that ability is certainly really powerful in itself. I think the coolest interaction in this deck for me is just the ability to use your removal spells with your Chainwhirler. Even your shocks turn into Path to Exiles when you're attacking. Getting one for ones with your shocks on huge creatures with your Goblin Chainwhirler is really big. And also, I think that people just don't play around Chainwhirler enough with this deck. I constantly find myself getting two for ones with that card. Giving yourself virtual card advantage, it's not even virtual, it's just actual card advantage with these Chainwhirlers has been really good and something this deck really likes. And it is. I'm thinking it's worth it. I'm trying versions without Chainwhirler, but I do think that the Chainwhirler is just a huge boon to the deck. I think the worst card in the deck is the Gruul Guildgates, but I think that they're necessary so that you can play the number of green cards that you want, especially considering you have things with green activated abilities that are warriors. That Growth Chamber Guardian does take a green to activate, and that's really important. The sideboard is something that I've been working on like crazy. The most important cards I think are Cindervines. There are matchups such as Simic Nexus where you need a Cindervines to win. They also can't really beat a Cindervines. It's pretty tough for them to beat that card, and so unless they're sideboarding, in a ton of creatures, and in those games you're usually attacking and still winning, unless they have a really good draw with an ooze. So Cindervines is a really important sideboard card, and really important because you need cards that swing matchups, and Cindervines does a really good job of doing that for a matchup that should be pretty bad. I think the other thing that we look at here is Kraul Harpooner and the removal spells. Uh, you're going to board in creatures against this creature a lot, and you're going to board it against flyers. You're going to board it against other creature decks, and it's to both gum up the ground, to be a little bit bigger, to grow your stuff, to be more aggressive. Those Kraul Harpooners come in a lot of matchups, and I was really happy that because I moved the Domri rates to the main deck, I was able to move Kraul Harpooners to the sideboard and not lose percentage points in matchups like Esper, but actually gain percentage points in Esper, and also not be losing stuff in the matchups like Mono Blue, where Kraul Harpooner is really good. So that's been pretty sweet. I think that outside of that, the sideboard's pretty basic. You can probably figure out where most cards go. I want Fight with Fire against things like Lyra. I want Karn and Legion's Warboss against Esper decks, control decks, things like that. And then you want Status Statue when you're trying to gum up the ground. So there have been many, many games where I've won on the back of Status Statue to the point where it's not just me being. I think it's a real thing that you can do in the deck, which is pretty sweet. So I tried a ton of different lists. I tried Tim Wu's list. I tried just editing 2 cards. I tried editing 6 cards. This is probably the deck I changed the most, and even doing that, I got a 10-2 record with the deck. Played 12 matches between all the lists that I played, and just kept winning, kept having fun. This is the one that I enjoyed the most. I know I had better records with like the Dragons deck, even maybe with Jeskai Control, stuff like that. I think I might have X1 with Sultai, but this is the deck that I enjoyed the most so far in this quest. It's been really fun, and I don't know. I tried things like Treasure Map. I even have it in a new list that I'm trying that plays Elf because I think it might be better in an Elf list. But Treasure Map in this list was really bad because you're a curve out deck. So one of the things that I was trying Treasure Map because I wanted to improve my Esper matchup, but what ended up happening is I was playing off curve the whole time, and then my deck even got worse. So that's an interesting card that I know I played against this week, and my opponent ended up losing when I was playing Esper because they cast it. So it's definitely happening from both sides. Mono Blue is a really good matchup, and it's actually a huge reason to play the deck. The matchup is so good that I got to change cards to decrease my percentage, and it's still, I think, my best matchup. And then I talked a lot about Esper. I think that that's a matchup that's really skill intensive. You got to play a lot to understand how you want to play, how you want to board, what you want things to go. But I am starting to win that matchup more than I'm losing it. Whereas when I started, I felt like it was my worst matchup, even over Simic Nexus, because my sideboard for Simic Nexus has those 4 Cindervines, and I just didn't have something to do for Esper. Team of Reclamation is a deck that I think is a really bad matchup. I got really lucky and beat it last night, but that might be my only win against it. They've got Niv Mizzets. They got board wipes for your early creatures. That matchup's been really, really bad. So that's one I would worry about. I think Nexus of Gates, for example, is probably a tough matchup for you as well. Those are things to worry about. The big mana Reclamation decks basically are all really tough. But I do think that Niv Mizzet specifically has been a beating If they ever untap with that card, you have a really hard time. Overall, I've really enjoyed this deck. It's definitely the deck that I would play tomorrow if I had an event. And it's been really fun. It's something that I've really enjoyed. So if you like this list, you want to see how this list evolved through time, go to patreon.com/ccmtg or patreon.com/thetrophymages and just check out the things that we're doing over there. And it means the world. If you want to watch me stream, I stream on Thursdays and Saturdays right now. Having a lot of fun. I streamed for 2 hours yesterday on Saturday, and we played Gruul. We played Temur Explore. We played Mono Blue. So we're having a lot of fun over there. And don't forget to check out the podcast every week on constructorcriticism.com. Thank you everybody so much for watching. This was a fun one for Quest for 10, and I'll be back to talk with you guys about Esper next week. Bye everybody.